I think we can all agree that mental health is a very stigmatized topic, especially in our community, and people with mental illnesses have been treated differently by the rest of the community just based on the fact that they have been diagnosed or they're known to have a mental illness. And when we identify people based on the illnesses and give them terms based on their illnesses, such as that depressed relative of yours, or that psychotic patient, or that addict in that house, for example, we are stigmatizing against people with mental illnesses. And stigma is just basically when we feel and act differently in a negative manner towards someone just based solely on the fact that they have been diagnosed or we know that they have a mental illness. So if you feel that this is a topic that may interest you, or you have been stigmatized before, or you have a relative who has a mental illness and want to know how to better your relationship with them, then stay tuned. So just to start us off, it will be important to note that there are different types of stigma, and for the purpose of this video, we're going to just look at real stigma and perceived stigma. So real stigma is the one that you can see, you can clearly see it when people are treating you differently, isolating you from situations just by the fact that you have been diagnosed with a mental illness. Perceived stigma is when you feel that people may be treating you differently based on the fact that you have a mental illness, which may not necessarily be true at times. And this perceived stigma is usually a very big barrier to seeking help. And the perceived stigma may be from the patient themselves, or even sometimes from the relatives. They're just scared on how the society may feel based on the fact that they're related to someone who has a mental illness. Yeah. So there's so many things that stigma can do to a person's life and how it can impact on their day-to-day functioning, and we're just going to look at some of these effects. So first, we have the feeling of shame, hopelessness, and worthlessness, and just not knowing where the end sight is. Like, when does this all end? Will they be labeled schizophrenic for the rest of their lives, wherever they go? And this can worsen the cycle of the mental illness, and at times, in severe cases, can lead to suicidal thoughts and ultimately a suicidal attempt or suicidal acts. It can also cause reduced social interaction, and this can be from both perceived stigma or real stigma. Perceived stigma in the sense that they do feel, if I go for that social function, people may treat me a bit different, so they avoid it altogether. Or real stigma is when people avoid calling them for functions and inviting them to social gatherings or events out of the fear that they will erupt or cause violence within the function. So it can also cause reduced self-confidence and self-doubt, and this can even eventually impact on their decision-making and pursuing big careers and big job opportunities, just on the fact that they believe already that they may not be qualified, or someone may not consider them as a viable candidate just because they have been diagnosed with a mental illness, or they are battling a mental illness and are on medication. So another effect could be bullying, and especially among children and adolescents, and this could be direct or indirect, and it can be in any form of bullying. I mean, from being isolated from play groups, being made to sit alone in class or play by themselves, or just being abused, using verbal words to make them feel less of a person just because they are battling a form of mental illness. So they're just different. So we've talked about the effects of stigma, and this next section we're just going to look at some of the ways in which you can deal with stigma. So we're going to start with the person who has been diagnosed with mental illness, or the family member who feel some sort of perceived stigma towards that mental illness. So the first thing is to avoid identification with labels. I was having a conversation sometime earlier this week with some people, and something that came up is how you constantly called a certain term and a certain term is used towards you, and after a while it gets to a point where you start identifying with that term. So another important thing you need to do is to avoid isolating yourself and hiding away from the rest of the world. You can find a friend, a family member, a religious leader, or a community leader in whom you can just trust and confide in and just talk to about whatever difficulties you're going through, and they can just walk with you through that journey. So another thing that you can do is connect with people through support groups. And the good thing about support groups is just finding people who have been through a similar journey that you are going through or have been through, and they can just help you with the experience to know that you're not alone and things do get better with time, and just help each other with whatever emotions that you're going through at that particular point. Just find sort of a support network that can just cushion you through those difficult and hard times, because I mean the recovery journey is not like a smooth line. It will have its ups and downs. So just having people that you can talk to and just who identify with the kind of emotions that you're going through is very important. When things get very difficult, it may be important to seek mental help. And you can seek this from either your counselor, your psychologist, your psychiatrist, whatever mental health professional that you want to go through, and just explain to them the kind of difficulty or the impact that the mental mental illness stigma is having on you. And lastly, for you, it's very, 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 very important to note that people will judge you based on their understanding of what is going on. So there are people who just stigmatize you based on their ignorance and lack of knowledge of what mental illness is, and that is not your fault at all. That has nothing to do with you, and that is very important to note that people just treat you based on what they know. So don't let someone's ignorance or lack of knowledge be a reason to crush you and make you feel bad about yourself. I mean, you're already ahead of them in some way. You know something that they don't. The other thing we need to do is just to speak out against these injustices. If you're at an event or around people who are stigmatizing or using discriminatory language towards people with mental illnesses, to be very, very, very helpful if you could just educate them and just tell them what you are saying is wrong, the term you're using towards this person is wrong, you could use this term alternatively, and this will help go a very long way in terms of just reducing stigma within our community. The other thing you can just do is just to share your experience about the mental health recovery journey, whether you're the patient or a family member, and just how the stigma has impacted on you. And this can help go a long way in terms of educating others. Because we should know, I mean, really, mental illness is not something that one should be ashamed of. It's not something that you've called upon yourself. It's an illness. It's an illness just like any other illness, and no one should make you feel guilty or ashamed about it. So if you can just talk about it, share your experience, and just put it out there and help others know that this is something that you have recovered from. Yes. So now we're going to go to the next and final section of this video, and that is the myths of mental health. So we're going to check what is factual and what is really untrue. Yes, so we can start off. Myth number 1: mental health illnesses are rare. That is not true at all. In fact, a research done a few years ago based in Kenya, not anywhere else like how we say, oh, outside there, Western world, no. Based in Kenya, a study done showed that 1 in every 4 people are experiencing a mental health difficulty or have been diagnosed with a mental illness. Myth number 2: there's nothing you can do to help a person with a mental illness, and all they need to do is just snap out of it. No, this is not true at all. The first thing you can do to a person who has a mental illness is just ask them, what help can I offer you? What do you want me to do for you? And just hear them out. Don't impose your solutions on them without even knowing what kind of help they need to begin with. The other thing is just listen to them. At times all they need is someone to talk to and just vent out the kind of emotions that they are having at that particular moment in time. And when you do this, you need to be non-judgmental, and you need to just have an open mind, just hearing what kind of difficulties are they going through, and you need to treat them the same way that you treat everybody else. Don't treat them with pity, look at them and feel like they need some sort of correcting, or you need to fix them some sort of way. No, just sit there, listen, be there for them, and just understand what help do they need. Don't cross your boundaries when it comes to helping them. And the other thing is just continue encouraging them and continue asking them, how can you help? How can I help you? Sometimes they may not be very responsive initially. They may want to hold back. Just keep asking, how can I help you? They don't need help for that day, it's okay. Tomorrow you ask, how can I help you? And even as you do this, they get to know that you actually care, and eventually they may open up and tell you what kind of difficulties they are going through, and whenever they need help, they know that you're someone that they can always come to. Yeah. Myth number 3. People with mental illnesses cannot work. This is absolutely false. And people with mental illnesses, just like any illness, once they have recovered from their acute state and they're stable, to just go back to work and work normally. In fact, there's so many people. As we said, 1 in 4 people have been diagnosed with a mental illness. So you are probably working with someone who already has been diagnosed previously with a mental illness. We have doctors, judges, musicians, entertainers, engineers, people from every social background who have been diagnosed with mental illnesses, got medication, severe mental illnesses, got medication, got admitted, recovered, and they're now back to their normal functioning. At times even people have no clue whatsoever. Yes. Myth number 4. People with mental illnesses will always get a child with a mental illness. Absolutely not true. Yes, genetics does have a role to play when it comes to development of mental illnesses, but there are other contributing factors, such as environmental factors, from the time you're in your mama's womb to your early childhood to your early adulthood to, currently, drugs and such alike things, alcohol, use of drugs, many other contributing factors can contribute to a mental illness. Myth number 5. You can never recover from a mental illness. Absolutely not true. Recovery is basically the return to normal functioning, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whether it's in school. And as we said before, people with mental illnesses, once they have been managed effectively, do return to their normal functioning. They go to work just like everybody else, they go to school just like everybody else, and interact with their family just like everybody else. Myth number 6. Yes. People with mental illness are violent and unstable. This is absolutely not true. In fact, many times people with mental illnesses end up being victims of violence rather than the perpetrators. Myth number 7, and the last one for this video, is no, it's important to note the difference between normal mood escalations, the usual day-to-day up and down changes in mood, and what is defiance and what is just an obvious mental illness, because children and adolescents too develop mental illnesses. And that brings us to the end of our discussion today, and I hope you learned something, or at least enjoyed the video. You can always add more myths that you have learned, or give us your story if you feel like you'd want to share your experience and just make life better for someone else who may be going through something similar. Yeah? So next week we are going to start a viewers section, which is where you can request a video that you'd want, a discussion rather, that you'd want us to do on mental health difficulties, psychological problems, behavioral problems, child and adults, anything that you'd want us to discuss about. So see you next week, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. And yes, peace out.